Welcome to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. And on this week's episode, we have a very special guest. It's Bruce Nolan. He's currently the host of Bruce Exclusive. Episode 2 airs this Thursday, so definitely tune in. And he'll be helping us break down the AFC East today. So as a proud member of Bills Mafia, when did your fandom for the Buffalo Bills begin?
So, like a lot of people, it began early in life, but not necessarily for the reason that you would otherwise expect. So, I was born on the west side of Philadelphia, and the extended family of the Nolans, they're all Eagles fans. And when I was very young, I was taken to an Eagles game. And if you know anything about Philadelphia Eagles fans, they're not known as being overly hospitable. And so I was taken there as a fairly young child, and I was walked away from that game with a very different perspective on Eagles fans than I had walking in. And I was kind of, I don't want to say traumatized is not the right word, but I was concerned as a young man, a very young man. And I went to my father after I was done with that game, and I said, "Dad, I can't be a fan of the Eagles anymore with you and my brother and my uncle and all and so forth." And he goes, "Oh, really? Is that the case?" I said, "Yes. I just can't be a fan of a team that has fans like that." Of course, I'm young and a moron at the time. Now, you can make an argument I'm still a moron, but the point is that I didn't know that every team had fans like that. In my head, the logical thing to do was just not be a fan of the team that had people who would do these things. So, because I'm young and, as pre-established, a moron, I decided that the most logical thing to do to pick a new team would be to count up all of my football cards. And whoever I had the most football cards of, I was going to be a fan of that team, because that made all the sense in the world.
That makes so much logical sense.
Absolutely. So I counted up all of my football cards, and I had the most Buffalo Bills cards. So I went to my dad and I announced that starting today, I'm going to be a Buffalo Bills fan. And of course, him being a father to a very young child was like, "Oh yeah, sure," thinking there's no way this will stick. Well, it stuck. And so, with basically no connection to the city of Buffalo, I didn't actually end up taking my first trip to the city of Buffalo until I was in my late teens. And I just decided I was a Buffalo Bills fan. And so it stuck all these years later.
That's a fantastic story to hear. I have a lot of family in Philadelphia. I've been to the Link myself, and you're absolutely right. They are some rowdy folk up there. My question for you is, with that football card collection, was your favorite card Bruce Smith, or did you have another favorite?
No, my favorite player growing up was Steve Tasker. After I became a fan of the Buffalo Bills, and so that was my player. I had a thing for special teams players, and really high effort guys, a big Don Beebe guy, and the Bruce part is not related to the pseudonym, is not related at all to Bruce Smith. It's actually related to a Jim Carrey movie that takes place in Buffalo, New York, where he plays a news reporter named Bruce Nolan. And so when I became a member of the Buffalo Bills message boards, back when there was an official Buffalo Bills message boards, the username that I utilized was Bruce Nolan, in homage to that character from Bruce Almighty, which is the name of the movie. When I moved over to Twitter, far before I ever was creating content, I was moving over to Twitter to connect ostensibly with the people that I knew from the Buffalo Bills message boards. So because of that, I went by Bruce Nolan. And then it just I ended up creating content many, many years later, and I just went with my Twitter name. So here I am.
That's awesome to hear, the alter ego story. I had no idea up until then that your real name wasn't Bruce. So that's awesome. So for all the listeners, if you keep a lookout, maybe an FBI friend can dig up some dirt. But without further ado, we'll kind of kick into the Buffalo Bills section. The first interaction that you and I actually had on Twitter was in regards to the hiring, or should I say firing, of Ken Dorsey and the promotion of Joe Brady. And so on your latest podcast, you talked about some of the usage rates that Joe Brady has incorporated with James Cook and some of the other running backs. And so my question to you is, do you think moving forward this is better for the offense, or do you think they'll take a step back from last year?
I think that ultimately, I have a personal preference when it comes to running back usage. And that is, unless there is a drastic level of talent difference, then I would prefer multiple running backs be utilized as long as their skill sets are well-rounded enough that you are not tipping your hand by putting them on the field. That has always been my approach. I don't think specialization is always a good thing in offense, because you cannot have specialization without a certain degree of predictability. And that's true in offense. If you have a guy that you only put on the field for specific things, then when you put him on the field, either it's that specific thing or you're faking that specific thing. And that's it. So I think it's a little bit like having it's like having a big man who doesn't shoot in the NBA now, right? It really limits your options. And so specialization for me is not always a good thing. So unless you just have an elite level talent, right? Unless you have a Christian McCaffrey, then I want to spread the wealth. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing for the offenses in the NFL. I don't think that there is a strong correlation between what you would consider to be workhorse running backs and overall offensive success overall. So for me, that's the way I look at it. I think it's a good way to make sure that you're getting maximum productivity from a running back during their rookie contract and limiting the chance of injury, which every game that they're out injured during the rookie contract is lost ROI. And I don't want to lose ROI. So I don't want to overwork them during their rookie contract. I want to balance that out perfectly. So right when they get to the end of that rookie contract, you're like, hey, we got good use of them out of them. We can, say thank you for the help and go find your next contract elsewhere.
Awesome. So I know that you thought Ty Johnson would cut into some of the splits, but do you think Ray Davis as a rookie, kind of starting that rookie contract, is going to be kind of implemented into that kind of blended, everybody kind of splits snaps and kind of like balance the load?
If Ray Davis can show that he can block, if he can be trusted to pass block, I think he's already set up for a good role. What you saw last year is you saw as the year went on, and specifically after Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator for the Bills, you saw James Cook being asked to pass block less and less and less. And it's because Joe Brady leaned into the specialization of his running backs. And James Cook isn't a dynamic pass blocker. And at the very beginning of the year, you had Latavius Murray to do that, and then he was essentially your secondary running back as well. At the very end of the year, instead of it being split two ways, you're kind of splitting it three ways now, because Latavius Murray fell off as far as effectiveness as a runner, but then you had Ty Johnson, who was more effective as a runner. Ironically enough, Ty Johnson, fun stat about Ty Johnson, if Ty Johnson would have had enough carries to qualify, he would have led the NFL in rushing success rate. He was an extremely effective third down and goal line run back for the Buffalo Bills, because success rate is exactly that, right? Getting the offense to stay on schedule, getting the first down, moving the chains, doing what you got to do to deliver and not put you behind the sticks. So I think that Ray Davis, if he proves he can pass block, could essentially take two roles of the three that were established at the end of last year by Joe Brady. And that is, you could take the secondary runner role, you could take the primary pass blocker role, and what if you're a better runner of the ball than Ty Johnson is? What if you're a better pass catcher than expected? All of a sudden now, it looks like you're eating into it. So I think the whole thing is going to hinge on whether or not Ray Davis can prove himself as a pass blocker early. And I have optimism specifically because when Brandon Beane was asked, the general manager of the Buffalo Bills, about Ray Davis, the first thing he talked about was block. That was the thing that really jumped off the table at him. He was like, whoa, that guy can block. And Ray Davis, if you watch the film on him, I think the technique needs some working on when it comes to blocking, but the effort and the awareness is there. And that is way more than half the battle when it comes to pass blocking.
Well, not to mention, compared to James Cook, his size too. James Cook is what, 195-ish pounds or something like that. So even just being out there for Davis, including the effort you're talking about, he's going to be able to put like linebackers in conflict when they're trying to rush. It's kind of like what I looked at with Kyron Williams when he came out of the draft, and we see what he's able to do now in Los Angeles, almost at Las Vegas. Too many lost teams nowadays. But I really like the not only the Ray Davis addition by the Buffalo Bills, but I think a lot of their rookies can see playing time early and often this season. Not just guys like Keon Coleman, but You have guys like Cole Bishop and Daquan Hardy who can kind of fill in some secondary spots where the Bills have lost people to free agency, maybe retirement with Micah Hyde. We kind of don't really know what's going on there, or just to injuries over the past couple of years. They always seem to be banged up in the secondary. So I think they've done pretty well looking at people or identifying people in the draft that can play roles early. And that's one of the things I'm optimistic about, where a lot of the media talk is maybe they're taking a step back this year.
I think a lot of that talk comes from the loss of names.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the higher level that you look at this Buffalo Bills team at, and I think the more distant you become from it, the more concerned you become. The reason why a lot of people who are really in the weeds are not as concerned as people who are very high level national analysts is because the names are just that name. So you say, well, you lost Jordan Poyer, you lost Micah Hyde. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde both were not quite the level of player that you thought they were 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Like you had started to see them lose a step. You had started to see them drop off. I mean, if the contract that Jordan Poyer signed with the Miami Dolphins is any, indication, there wasn't like a massive bustling market for the services at that point. And I think one of the reasons he actually came back to the Buffalo Bills in 2023 was because the market wasn't quite what he thought it was going to be when he went out and hit the free agent market. And so you see these names that you lost. You see Stephon Diggs, you see Micah Hyde, you see Jordan Poyer, you see Tre'Davious White, and you go, wow, they lost all these names. The Bills have operated a large chunk of the last 3 seasons without Tre'Davious White as it is because of injuries. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, while still good veteran heady players, were not the level of players that they were previously. Now, Stephon Diggs is, still a really good receiver. The first half of 2023, he was on record pace. But the last part of 2023, and specifically the fit with Joe Brady's offense, was not exactly what you would call ravishing statistically. And so the Buffalo Bills fans are going to have that context. They're going to have the Stephon Diggs back half of the year context, which is not quite enough to make you go, oh, he's not a good player anymore, but maybe enough that you go, okay, maybe you're not losing like a top 5 receiver anymore. Maybe you're losing like a top 20 receiver now. And that still stinks, but it doesn't burn as bad as it does if you are a little disconnected from the situation and you just see the name Stephon Diggs and you go, oh my gosh, they lost Stephon Diggs. It's a little different. It's the same thing with Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White. So I think it's the loss of names and the distance from the team that causes people to think that.
Well, we've seen a lot of teams when Stephon Diggs signed that extension in Buffalo. We saw Devontae Adams get traded. We saw Tyreek Hill get traded. And we saw the Packers kind of rebuild from there. The Chiefs have won back-to-back Super Bowls. And this kind of like almost like getting to the bare bones of the roster, getting rid of these names. And exactly like you said, people don't recognize that age curves are a real thing, that some of these guys are getting older. They lose a step. They aren't the same player they were. Like you pointed out with Trey White, he struggled to stay on the field for health concerns, for various number of injuries. And my actual question to you was actually losing Dane Jackson. Is that a bigger hit than Trey White? Because I think losing him in the secondary is bigger. Now you get Daquan Hardy in the draft, you get Cole Bishop to kind of reinforce some of those spots. But that is, I think, a bigger loss when you're looking at kind of the team and the roster as a whole.
From an availability standpoint, yes, because Dane Jackson's been more consistently available over the last couple of years. I don't think anybody would mistake Dane Jackson for Tre'Davious White's natural talent. Tre'Davious White was one of the most effective ball taker aways. That's a word I just invented right now. Ball taker awares of the last couple of years. And that's ultimately what you want to see from your defensive secondary, because the way that defenses are built nowadays is built to deliver explosive plays of their own and to prevent explosive plays by the offense. The days of, hey, we're going to hold them down for, 9, 10, 12 play drives. That's not happening. So instead, as a defense, you need to generate explosive plays on your own. You need to generate sacks, massive tackles for loss, interceptions, pass break. You need to generate explosive plays as a defense, and you need to stop those explosive plays as an offense. And so Tre'Davious White was the guy who could take the ball away. He was the guy who could force a fumble. He was the guy who could get fumble recovery. He was the guy who could do those things. And so the Bills are still going to miss him. But the Dane Jackson thing hurts from a depth standpoint. The Buffalo Bills drafted Kaiir Elam in the first round a couple of years ago, and he has not lived up to billing at this point. And so the overwhelming consensus is that this is the year he has to kind of step up. I don't think he's slotted to even sniff a starting role, quite frankly, right now, because I think Christian Benford has that spot essentially locked down, and I think he was clearly the better corner of the two of them. And so for me, I think that Dane Jackson matters from a depth standpoint because it kind of removes your safety net. If Kaiir Elam doesn't step up, your third outside corner is now a guy you don't trust who could officially be labeled at that point a first-round bust. And so we kind of need him to step up. I don't know if you're ever going to get the kind of player that you thought you were going to get in the first round, but if you get a good player who can come in and give you really good snaps, then that's good enough at this point.
Well, I think as Panthers fans, we're kind of hoping that Dane Jackson is a bigger loss or maybe a bigger gain than Trey White would have been. But overall with the Bills, I kind of see it as like you're saying, maybe status quo. Maybe the losses aren't as big as further away media or national media perceive it to be. So like looking at floors and ceilings, I really think that they can just keep maintaining deeper playoff runs. I mean, you still have Josh Allen. The offense, I think, while it may have taken just a tiny step back from an EPA per play standpoint or something like that when Brady took over, he certainly spreads the wealth around more. And I think the advantage of having them run the ball more means Josh Allen doesn't have to take beatings late into the season, so he's more fresh for the playoff runs. I really think that they can just keep going like they've been going.
When it comes to floors and ceilings for the Buffalo Bills this year, I mean, the ceiling is Super Bowl because you're a Super Bowl contender. Now, obviously, I have a broader definition of Super Bowl contender than a lot of people do. For me, if you can win a Super Bowl and not have the narrative be, holy crap, no one saw that coming. Wow, these guys came out of nowhere. They weren't even, did you guys think they were good? I didn't even think they were good. Like, if that's not the narrative, then you're a Super Bowl contender, right? The Ravens are a Super Bowl contender, right? The Bills are a Super Bowl contender. The Chiefs are a Super Bowl contender. The Niners are a Super Bowl contender. The Eagles are a Super Bowl contender. Why? Because if they won it, nobody would go, what, really? No. You know who's not a Super Bowl contender? The Saints. Right? Like if the Saints came out and Derek Carr went on an absolute tear and won the Super Bowl, everyone would be like, you've got to be kidding me. This is insane. Did anybody see this coming? No. Well, then by definition, they're not a Super Bowl contender. And so for me, I think the ceiling is Super Bowl. The floor, which I'm counting as worst possible scenario, is second in the AFC East. Could they feasibly not win the division this year? Sure. They only won it by one game last year. Like, is it absurd to think that they could somehow end up second in the division and the Dolphins can win it? Sure. That's not absurd at all. That's totally possible. Why? Because it was one game away from happening last year. I'm not an idiot. Like, it's possible. That's within the range of reasonable outcomes. And so for me, that's the way I look at the floor and ceiling for the Buffalo Bills. The reason obviously you want to win the division is, you want to play a home playoff game. You want to try and get a bye if you can. And that is the easiest way to go about doing that. Now, I still think they're going to win the division, but if they ended up second in the division, would I lose my marbles because that's not even within the realm of possibility? No, I wouldn't.
I think that's a fair floor and ceiling. I'm of the mindset that I think their floor is they somehow miss the playoffs. That losing some of these bigger names that the guys that I brought in either through the draft or free agency aren't able to fill some of the holes on the roster, and they kind of fall short in a very stacked AFC. But in terms of ceiling, I'm right there with you. I think Super Bowl is in kind of the cards. I think if everything kind of falls right, the AFC is a little bit weaker. The Ravens lost a lot of people. The Chiefs wide receivers can't stay out of legal issues in terms of speeding on the road. And you wonder if that's going to cause some issues to where it opens a door for the Bills when they've kind of had that door shut on them the past couple of years. So I'm right there with you. I'm a big fan of what Brandon Beane has done. I think he is a very, very good general manager. And if he's able to retool this roster similarly that Chiefs did a couple of years ago under Brett Veach, they're very much in the runnings. Now, a team that the Bills have manhandled over the past several years during the Josh Allen era are the Miami Dolphins. And you brought them up as a team that could potentially unseat the Bills as the division favorites. But Josh Allen is 6-1 against Tua. And so my question is, do the Dolphins have enough? Did they do enough this offseason to get over that hump and win the division? Because for the Bills, their hump is getting past the Chiefs. For the Dolphins, it's getting past the Bills.
I mean, you could make an argument that they were, a couple of snaps away from getting the division over the Bills last year. So I don't know that there was all that significant of a hump to clear. I mean, some of the Buffalo Bills fans are not going to like it that I said that for sure. But the fact of the matter is you went into the last game of the season needing to win to get the division. If you lost the division. That's how close it was. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, that was outside the realm of possibilities. If the Titans don't come back and score 15 points in the last 4 minutes to end up beating the Miami Dolphins and they completely collapse, then the Dolphins end up taking the division. Like it's that simple. Like if you don't let Will Levis come back in 4 minutes and beat you, then you win the division. Like that's how close it was. That's how little had to go differently for the Miami Dolphins to win the division last year. So absolutely, I think they could do it this year. Now, I will say that I think some of the losses matter. I think Christian Wilkins matters. I think Robert Hunt matters. I think Van Ginkel was a good player and matters. I think Odell Beckham is a lot flashier of a receiver acquisition that doesn't move the needle the way that the name moves the needle. I think Odell Beckham can still play, but I don't think he's the Odell Beckham at this point. So I know that looks a lot flashier than a lot of people. Underrated addition by the Miami Dolphins. I think Jonnu Smith can be a good player there. I think that people are going to look at Mike Gesicki and the way that he did not perform under Mike McDaniel, and they're going to assume that the same is true for Jonnu Smith. And they're missing the fact that Jonnu Smith is a yak player and Mike Gesicki is not. And they're going to say, well, receiving tight end didn't really flourish in Mike McDaniel's offense. No, Mike Gesicki didn't. That's different. That's not just any receiving tight end, right? Jonnu Smith is a yak guy, and I think that with the manufacturing that Mike McDaniel can do, I think he can play. So I do think that their defensive line is going to be a concern for the Miami Dolphins. But if they can get it right, I think that they can. I mean, I would be disappointed as a Buffalo Bills fan, as one who has a rooting interest, if the Miami Dolphins won the division. But I mean, that's totally within the realm of possibility.
So you talk about them losing Christian Wilkins, and I agree that that's a pretty massive loss. I mean, when we were doing our defensive line rankings about a month ago, both Steve and I had him in that honorable mentions list. So I think really important player there. And I think that's something people, I guess, gloss over or forget about is that both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb dealt with significant injury issues towards the end of the year last year. And what the Dolphins do, they go out and draft Chop Robinson, who at the time I didn't really like because I was like, okay, he's going to be their third rusher, right? They signed Shaq Barrett. They bring in like 40-year-old Calais Campbell, and he might still have something in the tank, but I think they've done quite a bit from an edge rusher perspective to ensure that they have the depth there and maybe be able to use them in a more multiplicative way down the stretch in the end of the season. So I do like what they've done to the defense. And granted, they had their issues last year with players like Ramsey wanting to do more and being kind of pigeonholed into certain positions and roles. So maybe they are able to do more. And I think they have brought in more talent on that side of the ball. But I do have concerns about the offensive side of the ball, actually. Like that offensive line, and we know Mike McDaniel is able to hide stuff from it. They didn't get any better, and they were already one of the worst lines in the league. I think we can all agree upon. They lost probably their second best player, and Robert Hunt. Teron Armstead, when he's on the field, obviously is a force to be reckoned with. But to me, that's the big concern is I know Tua can get the ball out quickly and efficiently. He's one of the best at doing that. I know Mike McDaniel can scheme people open in space, but if the offensive line can't hold up towards the end of the season, and we've seen the offense struggle in these colder weather games, is that going to continue to impact the Dolphins and hold them back from, say, winning the division? Like if they had locked in, like you said, against Tennessee, we'd be seeing them with the X next to their, or I guess the Y next to their name in the playoff standings.
Yeah. I like the addition of Anthony Weaver. He comes from the Baltimore Ravens staff. He's kind of like a defensive line coach. Ryan Nielsen also kind of had a similar background as being a defensive line coach and took a great first step as a defensive coordinator last year for the Falcons. So I think a lot is there for him to take that step and kind of get those guys playing on the same page. The fact that you bring in Calais Campbell and Tyler Tart to kind of solidify the interior of the defensive line with Christian Wilkins leaving in free agency, and then getting Chop Robinson and Shaq Barrett. both through the draft and free agency, to be able to get a little bit of an edge presence going while Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are recovering from injury are huge. I think where they're capped at is the quarterback, the guy throwing the passes to the playmakers on offense. And for me, when I'm looking at the numbers, the Bills, in terms of EPA, they were third in offense. The Dolphins were fourth. The Bills were 11th in defensive EPA last year, and the Dolphins were 15th. And so it's, can you get as good as the best team in the division? And for me, Tua's up to be paid. We already saw Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert in his draft class get paid. Is he worth $53 million? Is he worth a contract similar to what we just saw Jared Goff get paid? And if so, does that mean that some of the other superstars that they've been able to add through trade, free agency, or the draft, are they going to have to get cut or moved elsewhere to make room for a guy like him?
The way that I evaluate Tua is a little different than the way that I think a lot of people do. I think I'm higher on Tua than most. And that's, again, going to sound very weird coming from a guy who has a rooting interest in the Buffalo Bills, but I'm able to compartmentalize that pretty well. And for me, the way that I look at Tua is I look at Tua always as a super Jimmy Garoppolo. I have historically always looked at Tua as super Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think to myself, can you win a Super Bowl with super Jimmy Garoppolo? I think the answer is yes, because the actual Jimmy Garoppolo was very close to winning a Super Bowl. If he doesn't overthrow one particular deep ball in a Super Bowl, he has a Super Bowl ring. And so I know that Mike McDaniel, who I think highly of as an offensive play designer, I think that he gets a lot of credit, and Tyreek Hill gets a lot of credit, and Jalen Waddle gets a lot of credit, as they should. But Tua's ability to throw anticipatory passes to the middle of the field, I think gives him a leg up on a lot of people. That's where the game is played nowadays. Right? It used to be in the 1990s. That's not where you wanted to play the game from a passing standpoint, because you get your receivers killed first off, and they didn't want to be there. Now that's where you play the game. So the thing that Tua, you can make an argument, is weakest at, it was just playing outside of structure, but it's specifically throwing the ball deep down the sidelines on driving routes, right? You can't put any air under it. You need a 15-yard out route, right? Opposite hash, 15-yard out route. And I do think that there is a decent but not very great arm in there. I do think that's minimized by a little bit of the era that he plays football in. And I think that being able to throw anticipatory throws into windows aggressively, which I think he does in the NFL, is a trait that we just kind of accept as anybody can do that, because we see Josh Allen do ridiculous things and we see Patrick Mahomes do ridiculous things. And no one would ever consider Tua to be a creation style quarterback. He doesn't create offense. If he was a basketball player, you would not say he goes and gets you a bucket. You put him in ISO on the, at the top of the key, and he just goes and creates an offense, right? That's not who Tua is. And I think that there's always going to be limitations, because you would prefer that someone be able to create his own shot. But there's lots of 3-and-D people who make lots of money in the NBA, right? And Jared Goff, who I think plays the game fairly similarly, actually, to the way that Tua does. I think Jared Goff has a stronger arm than Tua, but the way that Jared Goff likes to win and the way that Tua likes to win are very similar. And I think that if Jared Goff's going to get $50+ million a year, I mean, I know that everyone says, you can get anybody and plug them in, but the Dolphins have played with other quarterbacks and it has not gone as well. In fact, it has gone fairly poorly with other quarterbacks not named Tua in the recent past. So for me, that's the way I look at Tua. I want to be honest about the fact that he's not a perfect prospect, but I think he's very much good enough to be able to win and win at a high level, because I don't think my bar for that is as high as other people's.
I think that's completely fair. And I think that that's a good segue into kind of floor and ceiling of this team. If we're looking at betting lines, FanDuel has them at 9.5 right now. And to be honest, with the track record Mike McDaniel has with how they've addressed some of the holes on their roster, I'm leaning towards going the over. I think this is going to be a playoff team this coming year. And for me, I think in order for them to take a step in the playoffs, to win a playoff game, get to the divisional round, maybe even make a push to the AFC Conference Championship game, they're going to have everybody healthy down the stretch, because that's what's hurt them the past couple years. You had Tua's concussion injuries 2 years ago during Mike McDaniel's first year. And then last year, you had a lot of guys getting injured on defense. You had guys banged up on offense. And then when it came to playing in the very, very cold weather in Kansas City, they just weren't built for it. And so I think if they're healthy, if they're able to do exactly like what you talked about Joe Brady doing with the Bills running back room, and that's just keeping guys fresh, cycling it through, and making sure everybody's healthy going into the kind of that playoff push, playoff run, I think they have a chance to do that. Now, if we're talking about floor, I see them missing the playoffs, maybe falling the third in the division, depending on if the Jets stay healthy. And that'll be the next team we talk about. But that's just kind of where I see the Dolphins right now. And they could very well go 9-8 and miss the playoffs and still finish second in the division.
I can see that. I can absolutely see that. I think the top of the AFC East is probably closer than people would like to admit. I think that the thing that gives Buffalo Bills confidence is that fact that they have been in the position, the Miami Dolphins, that is, have been in the position to take it from the Bills, and they just haven't done it. Mm-hmm. Josh Allen, specifically against the Miami Dolphins defense, has just, I mean, one of the main reasons why they keep cycling through defensive coordinators is because they can't stop Josh Allen.
Yeah. Not a lot of people can.
Yeah.
But I'm with both of you guys. I think when the offense is firing on all cylinders, it might be the best in the league. I think what Mike McDaniel is able to do in creating space, looking at his motions and stuff, I say this every time we bring him up. He uses Tyreek Hill in so many different motions that it's almost impossible for defenses to react. So I really love the ceiling or upside outcome of their offense. Just comes down to health, like you guys are talking about. For their ceiling, definitely think winning the division. But the floor, yeah, if injuries continue to be the case, missing the playoffs doesn't seem like a stretch.
Sweet. Okay. Talking about teams that have kind of gotten derailed with injuries, we have the New York Jets. And I would argue that a immovable object with the MetLife turf is meeting a very stoppable force when it comes to soft tissue injuries we've seen with Aaron Rodgers, Tyron Smith, and now Mike Williams that are now on the roster. And so my question to you guys, we know that they have an elite defense. That's been shown the past couple seasons. Are they going to be able to turn around with Aaron Rodgers and company, or are they going to fall flat on their face within the first couple minutes of the season?
For me, the New York Jets' hopes hinging on a 40-year-old quarterback coming back from an Achilles tear is suboptimal. I do think that they are in a much better position than they were last year. And the reason I think that is because they actually have a quarterback who I think that they're in a better spot top to bottom of the quarterback room. And I think they learned their lesson. And that's a good thing for them, because I think Tyrod Taylor is more than capable of being able to run that offense better than anybody ran that offense last year. And that's good. But ultimately, they need that to hold through. And I think that Nathaniel Hackett is probably the weak link in that team. And that works as long as Aaron Rodgers is there, because we've all established that Nathaniel Hackett, outside of Aaron Rodgers, doesn't really do anything on offense. And Aaron Rodgers with Nathaniel Hackett has had some good success. But does that make it a Nathaniel Hackett offense, or does that mean it's Aaron Rodgers offense? Nathaniel Hackett just lets him do what he wants to do, and he runs the offense. And really, that's the reason why Aaron Rodgers sticks up for him so significantly. And that's the reason why Hackett's been, an abject disaster in a lot of other places that he's been. Does that work if it's Tyrod Taylor? So I said, yeah, I think Tyrod Taylor can run the offense better than anybody else last year, but I don't know how good the offense is going to be running at all if Aaron Rodgers isn't doing it. And if Aaron Rodgers isn't doing it at as high of a level as he was when he was a back-to-back MVP, then are they still going to go again and say, well, it was this and it was this. Well, if it wasn't for Aaron Rodgers, then we would do. It's always something with New York Jets. One thing that they do have going for them is the exact thing we just mentioned. And that is, there isn't a defense in the football that has contained Josh Allen as well as the Jets defense has contained Josh Allen. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that gives them up, right? Robert Saleh has done a really good job with that defensive staff of combating Josh Allen. He just hasn't been able to get anything from his offense. And so it's either a quarterback who hasn't played at an elite level in 2.5, 3 years, and a backup quarterback who I really like, but would be running a Nathaniel Hackett offense. So I don't know if I'd like him as much running a Nathaniel Hackett offense. So it all hinges on things that both of those things feel really shaky to me. And that's ultimately the reason why I feel shaky about the Jets.
I think as well, the important infrastructure pieces that Steve mentioned at the top of the Jets segment here, those two things have to go right? Aaron Rodgers has to stay healthy and the offense has to keep humming. But then the guy protecting his blind side now is Tyron Smith, who hasn't been a clean bill of health the past few seasons. I know last season he played the majority of the games, but that's more of an outlier over the past couple of seasons for him. Mike Williams is his new receiver too, and he's dealt with his fair share of injuries, and all of that compiled with the, I guess the disgusting MetLife turf is the way to describe it. Terrible. I can't believe that two teams regularly play on that in this day and age, but all that combined is just doesn't inspire hope, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And if you are looking for hope, it's exactly what you're talking about, Bruce, with the defense. Looking at a defensive DVOA, the Jets were third last year. Really, really, really good. Then you look at the offensive DVOA, 32nd, worst in the league. And it's the combination of Zach Wilson and I don't even remember the other QBs they had. They brought in a couple, practice squad guys throughout the season. So it's really going to hinge on that offense. And I think health really is and it's cliche with every team, right? But health truly is the determining factor for the Jets, playoff success or even just regular season success this season.
Yeah, well, I would argue Tyron Smith, I don't know if it hinges so much on his health because you did just draft and this past year Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. I think he is a great tackle prospect, could be the tackle of the future for the Jets. You trade for Morgan Moses from Baltimore Ravens, and he's a solid right tackle. You already had a pretty decent interior offensive line. So I think from that standpoint, they're going to protect their quarterback. But you really need Mike Williams to be healthy to be that X wide receiver. And that's going to just open up so much for Garrett Wilson and open things up for him and kind of allow Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson to build chemistry. And that I think is a bigger determinant of how the offense is going to go, what they're going to be able to call. They obviously drafted Braylon Allen. They already have Breece Hall that is now 2 seasons removed from his ACL injury. So they could really lean into the run game, take a lot off Rodgers' shoulders, not ask him to do much, which I think would be kind of the smart thing. But overall, I think the markets are a little bit high on this team when talking about ceiling and floor. I think their ceiling is make the playoffs. I don't think this team is going to stay healthy enough down the stretch in a loaded conference to really do anything, especially when there's so many just question marks. Can Rodgers return to form at a 40-year-old? As a 40-year-old, and it's just too many of those for me to want to put this team up there. Their floor for me is that they're going to be picking in the top 10 again. And that's unfortunate, but that's just how I see kind of the cookie crumbling for them.
Oh, I gotta love the cookie crumbling reference. Well done. Well done.
So, Jacob, how do you see the Jets season? Oh, you're good. The season playing out. Do you have high hopes for Rodgers, or is this where you think the Jets fall flat yet again?
Look, you know me. I'm a big Rodgers as the player. I want to state that I'm a big Rodgers fan. I thought he's been the best QB in football, like throughout his prime. Patrick Mahomes is creeping up on that, but in terms of just pure talent, always been Rodgers for me. That being said, I just can't. There's like a lingering doubt, lingering fear, dread, whatever you want to call it, in the back of my mind that something's going to go wrong for the Jets, whether it be at health, like Bruce was talking about. Something always goes wrong with them. It might be the players, might be the turf, might be the owner butting his head in. It might be anything, might be the GM. And in particular, the coach and the GM, I think, are both on like a really, really hot seat this year. So they kind of need it to go well, but I could see them making the playoffs. That defense is super, super stout. They've been able to stop Josh Allen. They've been able to stop the Dolphins. They've been able to stop the Patriots, but they always win regardless against the Jets. But I do think that floor is a top 10 pick because we got to remember they were picking, what was it, 10 before the swap between them and Minnesota there. So I don't know. I don't see them making the playoffs. I have them third in the division for a reason. It's just I think they have the highest range of outcomes of all the 4 teams. But I don't believe in them, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, I get it. It's ironically enough, it's a similar conversation that I had with a lot of Browns fans last year when I just said, like, when was the last time you had a quarterback, whether it's because of injury, suspension, whatever it is, time away, you had a quarterback who essentially didn't play football for like 2 years and then, came back and played well. Like the distance between his elite seasons are 3 seasons, 2 seasons, 2.5 seasons. Like, how long has it been since we saw Deshaun Watson play elite football? 2020 at this point was the last time that Deshaun Watson played elite football. And so last year I was like, okay, what are the odds that the distance between elite seasons is going to go 21, 22, and then, boop, we're elite again. Well, he was, he's rusty. He wasn't playing football. It doesn't really matter the reason away. When was the last time for any reason you ever saw an elite season and then nothing, and then an elite season 2-3 years later? Like, it doesn't happen very often.
Mike Vick, maybe?
Like, yeah, Mike Vick with the Eagles. And the stars aligned with Mike Vick and Chip Kelly. Yep. Like, if Mike Vick would have come back and played for any other offense, would it have been like that? I don't think so. It was the perfect storm with Chip Kelly back when, people were still trying to figure out Chip Kelly and like, oh man, it's taken remember that opening game against Washington where it was the unveiling of Michael Vick and the Chip Kelly offense, and people were like, it's taking the NFL by storm. And then it was like gone a year and a half later.
Yeah, no, that sounds
everything
about
had
right.
to align. And what are the odds it's going to align for the Jets again? Is it possible? Sure, because I don't live in a world where everything's 100 or 0, right? Is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? I don't think so.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to sum it up.
That none of us are high on the Jets. I don't think anybody should be. They're the biggest cautionary tale, I feel like, in the NFL in its entirety, not just this division. And I think one of the funnier stats I saw this offseason was out of the AFC titles won since the Super Bowl era began, they are 5th. And there's 4 teams in the division. And that was back when the Colts used to be in the AFC East. They have more AFC East division titles than the New York Jets. And it's a sad franchise. It's great that they won with Joe Namath back when kind of the NFL was kicking off. But since then, I really think they are the laughingstock of the NFL behind like the Browns. So with that, we have a team that has been on the down and decline, and that is the New England Patriots. Since Tom Brady left, they've had 1 winning season. Bill Belichick has since parted ways, and his now his successor in Jared Mayo kind of takes the crown. They draft Drake May at 3. And I feel like they're rebuilding to the point that they could be in contention for the AFC East. And I think probably the next 2 seasons. And I think Drake May is a big reason for this. And my question to you is, and I don't know how much film study you've done from some of the college prospects, Bruce, but I think he's got some Josh Allen traits to his game. He's a big arm, big bodied quarterback, and he slings it downfield. And I think he can bring that to the next level.
You familiar with the term, the pendulum effect in dating and relationships? Is when it happens in NFL head coaches too. What you have to do is you have a tendency to date or hire somebody who is the exact opposite of the person you most recently dated or hired. You went from Mac Jones to Drake May. And I can't think of a more significant swing than style of play between the two of them. I think Drake May has very Justin Herbert-y traits. And I said that when he was coming out. And I think that if you are patient with him, you could very well look back and say, this guy was the best quarterback in the class. And I think that's going to be the key is, are they developing him? And that's, I think, the rub with the New England Patriots is that, okay, what are you developing him around? Because right now you're looking at DeMario Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, KJ Osborne. Juju Smith-Schuster is ostensibly still on that roster, but I don't think anyone expects him to still be on that roster shortly. Like, I think the rumors of his demise, I think, are well-founded in New England. And you got a rookie, a guy coming off a serious injury, a second-year player who's probably best in the slot. I really liked Javon Baker coming out, but he's still a rookie there. And specifically a day 3 rookie. I don't think you want to put a lot of emphasis on that. One of the things that the Buffalo Bills learned pretty early on when they rolled out rookie Josh Allen with, a bunch of future insurance salesmen when he was a rookie was, hey,
John Brown, Cole Beasley.
Yeah.
Yep.
So before that, the year before that, even the John Brown, Cole Beasley was after they got wise and they got some vets. When Josh Allen came in, it was worse than that by a meaningful margin. It was the dried up remains of what used to be Kelvin Benjamin. It was Andre Holmes was the other starting receiver, right? Yes. Okay. So you see where I'm going with this, right? We had an undrafted player out of Alabama. We were convinced was going to be, the new number 1 in Robert
Foster. Yeah.
Good old Robert Foster, right? That's who he had to throw to his rookie season. And I think that could have stunted his development. There were 2 things that the Buffalo Bills, I think, did wrong around Josh Allen, and they got away with it. One of those things New England is doing, which is not surrounding him with veteran receivers. The second thing that New England's doing really well that the Buffalo Bills did not do is they got a correct veteran quarterback. The level of respect that I have for Jacoby Brissett is meaningful. I think he was clearly better than Deshaun Watson last year the year before in Cleveland. And I think that he probably should have started over Sam Howell in Washington this past year. I'm glad that he got a chance to play, and I think he's going to start for the Patriots. I think they're going to do the right thing and kind of bring Drake May along slowly. But I don't want a developing quarterback around developing pieces.
Yep.
And that's the thing that you got with Josh Allen, and they got away with it. And I don't know if every team can get away with that. I use the term isolating the variable frequently when it comes to quarterback development. I want static items relative to a variable. I don't want variable items relative to a variable. Because then everything's fluid. Everything's moving around. Like, I can't identify development in my quarterback because the other things are up and down and inconsistent too. I want veterans. I want veteran wide receivers who know what they're supposed to do. They've been in multiple offenses. I want the John Browns and the Cole Beasleys of the world around a developing Josh Allen. So for me, I think the best thing the Patriots could possibly do is just not put in a highly variable quarterback with a highly variable wide receiver core, because I think that's a good way to break your new toy.
I'm with you there. And I think another concern for me is the offensive line. And granted, they have some veterans there. They have Mike Onwenu, David Andrews, but the line doesn't inspire confidence to me as well. They were pretty poor down the stretch last year. Just reminds me of, now granted, I think they're a little better, but it reminds me of what Bryce Young had to go through last year. Really hyped up offensive line because they stayed together the previous year under Steve Wilkes when it was a run-heavy unit. But injuries and everything falling apart just really kind of, I don't want to say facilitated because Bryce had his own issues, but really made it not easy to compound Bryce's issues, the play calling, and the receivers as well.
I agree with a lot of the points you both made. To the offensive line, I think that's the biggest concern on that side of the ball. They bring in Alex Van Pelt from the Cleveland Browns to be their offensive coordinator. And I think they're going to run the ball a lot more. I think that's why they extended Ramondre Stevenson. They extended Onwenu. They went out and signed Okafor, the left tackle from the Steelers last year, to be their starting left tackle. And he wasn't great last year, but you have at least somebody that's able to kind of fill in and be that guy for you this year. And so regardless of kind of all that run heavy stuff, I think you can run a lot of like play action off of that and really allow Drake May, once he kind of cracks the starting lineup, to show off his big arm. And I'm a big fan of Jalen Polk. I think that pick in the second round puts him, I personally had him above guys like Xavier Legette and Keon Coleman that went above him, because I think he's a more polished route runner. There's more explosive plays with him. And yes, Javon Baker was a day 3 pick. Demario Douglas is a second-year guy. But Kendrick Bourne, I think he is that kind of veteran presence. KJ Osborne from Minnesota, I think he offers some of that as well. And you have, in my opinion, a bunch of these like wide receiver 2s, probably more wide receiver 3s. And really next year, if you see enough growth from Drake May towards the end of the year, I think that's when you go out and you trade for a wide receiver 1, or you try to move up in the draft and get your guy. So I don't know if they're going to be a super like explosive offense this year, but I think if they can just kind of slowly churn out yards, put points on the board, they're still working with a top 10 defense. Last year, even with Christian Gonzalez and Matt Judon missing large portions of last year, they finished 8th in defensive EPA. And I think that's great to see. And they return a lot of those starters. I think they are going to be great on that side of the ball, and they're going to get in a lot of these just dogfights. And as long as they can keep the score close and give either Jacoby Brissett or Drake May opportunities to go win it down the stretch, this is a team that I think honestly can win 6-7 games. And this is kind of foreshadowing my perfect take, but I think they're going to overtake kind of the New York Jets and be the 3rd best team in this division when it's all said and done.
That's a take. That's a take. Now, do you think it's going to happen this year?
I think so. I think the Jets are too many injuries away from just like falling flat on their face. And when I look at the Patriots and how they're rebuilding, yes, it's a lot of no-name guys, but if they can all gel, and like I said, just keep the mistakes off the board. And Drake May, I think when you look at his sack rate in college, he was good at avoiding those. And as long as he's not making bad turnovers, even a guy like Jacoby Brissett, I think that was the beauty of him. When you talk about maybe him starting over Sam Howell last year in Washington, I don't know if he takes as many sacks, throws as many interceptions, and maybe keeps that offense just kind of on the field, just converting down after down, moving that ball, getting points on the board without giving the other offense a shorter field to work with. So that's my take on it. I think that they're doing it the right way. I think they are still a few pieces away, though, from contending with the Dolphins and the Bills in the division. But I think for me, they're the 3rd best team.
So I have to have a perfect take at this point, because I got to make sure I have a hot take about something related to the division. So my perfect take is going to be that the Buffalo Bills will have a roughly equivalent efficiency offense when it comes to passing the ball that they did with Stephon Diggs. I think everyone is expecting a step back, and I think that you might see a slight step back in volume. But from an efficiency standpoint, from just EPA per play, Josh Allen QBR, whatever you would like, I think you will see roughly an equivalency from efficiency, because I don't think Stephon Diggs, for all the volume, I don't think he was the overly most efficient receiver. Even at his peak with Buffalo, I don't think that he was, I think he was a volume receiver. I don't think he was an overly massive efficiency receiver. And I think that you're replacing him with a few receivers who are. I think more targets for Khalil Shakir probably increases your efficiency. More targets for Curtis Samuel probably increases your efficiency. He's always been an efficient player throughout his career. Now, I'm not saying that the volume is going to be a significant. I don't think the counting stats are necessarily going to be, you're not going to see 46 touchdowns from Josh Allen, I don't think, this year. Now, exactly. I think it's possible you see 40, because you've seen 40 touchdowns from Josh Allen 4 years in a row. But from an efficiency standpoint, I think it's roughly equivalent. And I think it's a hot take, because everybody is assuming some sort of step back.
I think what a lot of people forget, and Sean McDermott, he coached underneath Andy Reid, and you saw kind of Brandon Beane and his philosophy shift. They extend Dawson Knox. They draft Dalton Kincaid last year. They run a lot more 12 personnel, and that allows them to kind of disguise run and pass looks. And like you said, I think if Joe Brady can kind of spread the wealth, he's got playmakers there. And you're right, the volume may not be there for guys like Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, or even the rookie Keon Coleman, but I think they're all going to fit specific roles and get unlocked at different points in the season, because Josh Allen is just that good of a quarterback. He's an elite guy at that position, and I think that's what's going to keep him afloat. And I'm with you there. I think the passing efficiency will be there. I don't know if some of the counting numbers will be there, but I think from an efficiency standpoint, they're going to be right there with some of the best. Last year, They were the 5th best passing offense in terms of EPA. I see them as a top 5 unit because of the guy at the helm.
I think you're right.
Awesome.
I think that people who are fantasy people start to bleed into real football and start to think that volume, which is of course the king in fantasy, is necessarily a judgment of ability and a judgment of effectiveness. And I think that sometimes things like that get lost when you start dealing in some of the more advanced analytics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you there. I'm going to run over just a couple of the betting odds. Jacob is dealing with some Wi-Fi issues, so hopefully he gets on to make his perfect take before we wrap up here. Currently, the Bills have the 6th best odds to win the Super Bowl. So where you were talking about Super Bowl contenders, I think if you're in the top 10 of those odds, you're right there in contention. Right after them, you have the Dolphins at 12th. The Jets are actually a little bit ahead of them at 11th. And then the Patriots, because they are rebuilding, are currently at 31st. If we go down win total projections, again, this is using FanDuel. The Bills have the 4th highest win total odds, which is pretty crazy considering all the kind of retooling they're doing. The Dolphins come in at 13th. I think there are a lot of questions on the defensive side. Does Anthony Weaver work? Is he able to get some of these newer pieces to gel? Does a guy like Jalen Ramsey stay healthy? A lot of key questions there. The Jets come in at 9th. Again, really high. I am shocked that the market has this team as top 10. The next thing I would say is going to the Patriots. They're at 32nd, which is, again, surprising when you have a team like the Panthers and a few other teams that are kind of like devoid of talent, I would say.
I've got it. Bills, Dolphins, Jets, Patriots. I think that a lot of people have it that way. So this is not the time for the perfect take, right? This is the time for pretty much chalk, right? I think that I acknowledged early on, and I'll acknowledge again, that there's a possibility that doesn't look like this, right? If it ended up being Dolphins, Bills, Jets, Patriots, I wouldn't blow my mind, right? I'm not like, oh my gosh, who could have possibly seen this coming, right? But if I'm playing the probabilities, I'm playing that what we have historically seen is what we will continue to see.
Yep.
Yeah.
You back up the speed, Jacob. We gave our perfect takes. I said that I think the Patriots will finish better than the Jets this year in the standings in the AFC East. Bruce touched on that he thinks the passing offense in Buffalo will stay as efficient this year, despite the loss of a lot of big names, notably Stephon Diggs. So what's the perfect take that you want to roll out in regards to the AFC East?
So just real quick, sorry, internet cut out all the time, but we're back. My division standings are right in line with you, Bruce. Bills, Dolphins, Jets, Pats. I think I think the effective ranges for each team lines up with those with that order. So I'm pretty solid there. My take is that it's not going to go right for the Jets. It's all going to go wrong, and we're going to see either one or both of Joe Douglas or Robert Saleh getting the axe this year. I think they were afforded grace last year because they went all in on the Rodgers trade, right? They hadn't really, I believe this is Saleh's 4th season, if I'm correct. The first 2 years didn't go as planned, but hey, they finally got the quarterback, right? Zach Wilson wasn't the answer, so Rodgers was going to be the answer. He plays 10 seconds, all of 10 seconds, misses the season. So I think this is their last dance, if you will, with the current structure in line with the Jets. I think both of them, one or both, are going to get the axe at the end of the season because they will fall short and miss the playoffs.
Sweet. So that about does it here at Purrfect Takes. Next week, we'll break down the NFC East with Colin Dunphy. Bruce, thank you so much for tuning in this week to break down the AFC East with us. And again, guys, follow him on Twitter. Find his podcast on Spotify, Apple. I'm sure he's got it all over the place. It's the show that you put on when you're mowing the lawn. And I can't wait until you have your kind of winner tag for it, because that's pretty great. I wish I could have come up with something that clever.
Spoiler alert, I am going right now. I'm leaning toward the kind of working concept is the show where you go when you're shoveling snow.
That's pretty good. We don't get too much of that down here, though. So that might be just a Buffalo thing.
Yeah, target audience. You gotta figure out who the target audience is.
Awesome. Well, before we get off, Bruce, do you plan on going to any Bills games this year, jumping on any tables, or are you keeping it relatively chill this fall?
Highly unlikely. I'm not a sporting event person. I
Okay.
don't love crowds. In my old age, don't love crowds. And also, I get a way better experience watching it on the television from my house with my own private bathroom a few feet away and my wife's cooking. So I'm not sure why we pay a lot of money to leave the ideal situation to go to a suboptimal situation. But I suppose for many, the energy of being around, other Bills fans and things like that, that makes it the optimal situation. But I'm also afraid the FBI will be there and they'll be waiting in the wings to take me down. So for me, it's very unlikely that I will be at a game this year.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that changes in future seasons. Hopefully you guys are able to make a crack at the Lombardi Trophy. It would be great to see a team that literally watched 4 Super Bowls slip through their hands back-to-back years to finally get over the hump and bring a Lombardi home to Buffalo. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Guys, we'll catch you next week when we break down the NFC East.